Welcome to the Digital Agency Growth Podcast. I'm your host, Dan Englander.
Hunter, great to have you on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, of course. So I got a chance to kind of check out your background and everything, and I really think we can't get enough perspectives on customer journey and on also just more so like the mindset stuff of building a business.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that's something you focus a lot with your consultancy. But before we get into that, would you mind kind of giving, high level overview of your background and how you're approaching your consulting practice and everything?
Absolutely. So my name is Hunter, and I have a consulting business with my husband called Tortoise and the Bear, which makes 0 sense business-wise, but there are two favorite animals, so we thought it'd be really cute to combine them. My background is actually in the wedding industry. I was in the restaurant, wedding, wine, hotel industry for over a decade and rose all the way up from event manager to CEO of a multi-7-figure company before I suffered my own massive burnout and crisis and trying to figure out what I wanted to be when I grew up. So I spent several years figuring out who I wanted to be, what I wanted to do, recovering from burnout, kind of unlearning all of the things that I thought were true growing up with business, and decided to start my own business as a strategist for corporate expats and pandemic pivoters, and really helping them use a personality-based sales and visibility strategy to help them grow their business or scale their business and make it as easy as possible without overwhelm or burnout.
Awesome. There's so much I want to get into there. Just real quick before I forget, what was the word you used? Pandemic. What was the phrase?
Pandemic pivoter.
Pivoter. That's great.
Yeah.
That's catchy. But before we go into that, if you don't mind me going into your history a little bit, only because I got married recently back in September, and I just remember going through that with the planner and my wife and everything, and I was like, I don't envy you. This seems like I would never want to be in this business. It's everybody's most important day to you. It's something you need to build and scale. And so what was your experience there? Like, what made you want to get into the wedding industry? How has that helped you going through that?
Absolutely. So I actually was an academic beforehand. I went to a top 10 liberal arts college on the East Coast. I majored in sociology and Spanish. I wanted to be a professor. And then I just had this itch where I just really loved people. I loved food, wine, beverages, hospitality, being there for people's most important days, whether it's just a date night out or their wedding or a baptism or a birth or a retirement party. And so I decided to go back to culinary school after I graduated from college and started off in the restaurant business. And so I just loved the fast pace of it, the personalities. It was always something different, something exciting. And then my family decided to buy a ranch because they wanted to start a winery up in Central California. And so I worked along that property and helped grow it to where it is today. And it is a hard job. I always said it's an insanity. It's you have to love it. You have to really be oh my gosh, I'm so passionate about people's events and their weddings and their special day. Because if you're lukewarm about it, it will eat you up for sure.
Yeah, I can imagine. And what was the moment that you hit burnout? What caused it, and how did you know? And what was the process like of changing?
It's not an all of a sudden thing. It's a very slow, gradual process. And I'm a super type A, overachiever driven person. So for me, it was any problem can be solved if you just work hard enough. Any problem can be solved if you just sleep less and work more hours and throw your brain and money at a problem. So I would say over the course of about 5 years, I stopped sleeping through the night. I started having heart palpitations, and which I later on found out were panic attacks. I was diagnosed with depression, anxiety. I started having other health issues. And basically, I would go to the doctor and they were like, nothing's wrong with you. You're perfectly healthy. You're perfectly fine. Your heart's great. I'm like, it's not great. I'm not sleeping. My heart is racing constantly. I'm just sick. I have no energy. Things are not great. And so I actually started going down a path of more of the holistic Eastern medicine kind of woo spirituality to try and figure out what was going on with me. And that's when I really discovered that I was burned out. I was overly exhausted. I was overly stressed out. And I kind of came up upon a decision. I was 35 years old and basically do I stay in this job and possibly have a heart attack before I'm 40? Or do I leave my career and figure out, how to have a better life and how to do things better in a more healthy way for myself? And so I made the tough decision to leave my career behind.
Gotcha. And that's when you started this consultancy, or how did the early days, if so, how did the early days of that pan out for you?
Sure. So the consultancy I actually started 2 years ago. So when I left my career back in 2017, I started getting a lot of coaching certifications, partially to help myself heal and figure out what was going on, and partially because I really wanted to help people like myself not go through burnout, not go through the overwhelm and have to recover, because it's so much easier to be proactive and like stop it in its path versus to crash and burn and, rise like the phoenix type of thing. So I started getting a lot of coaching certifications, and I thought I wanted to be a coach. But when I got into coaching, I realized I am way too opinionated to be a coach. So a consultant suits me much better, where I'm just like, here's what you need to do. Here's the strategy. Here's the step-by-step, versus coaching is more like finding the answers within yourself, asking all the right questions, which I love. And I work with coaches to this day, but just doesn't fit my personality. So I got all these certifications and ended up connecting with a woman who owns a multi-7-figure coaching institute, and she was looking for an operations manager for her business. And so I read through the job description and just said, you know what, I can do this with my eyes closed. It's like everything I did, my brick and mortar job, just online. And I really wanted to be a digital nomad. That was like my number one goal in life, was to be able to work from anywhere, to never have to go into an office again, to never have to be in a certain location for my job. And so I applied for the position, and they hired me, and I've been with them for the past 2 years. And basically, once they hired me, I started getting into the online world, into the coaching world, and decided to really go all in on strategy. And so I built up my business over the past couple of years, from one lowly client all the way up to a dozen. And then I also have my like one-on-one VIP offer that I do with people as well.
That's awesome. And with Tortoise and the Bear, can you talk about the sorts of clients you're working with and what you're typically doing with them, from onboarding through your life cycle and everything?
Absolutely. So the big focus really is on people that, like I said, are corporate expats or pandemic pivoters. So what that typically means is that they are experts in some field. They might have been lawyers, they might have been doctors, they might have been coaches, they might have had their athletes, they might have had their own business before, but for various reasons, they decided to go into a different industry. They usually become coaches, consultants, or even like course creators or creatives themselves. And they want to start their business and grow their business and scale their business. But they get to that point where like their drive, their energy, their education, all their experience, like they're stuck. And so they built this business. They're like, oh my gosh, I was so successful right off the bat. Everything was going really well. And then they're like, how do I build this? How do I grow this? How do I scale this? And so that's when I come in and basically look at, what are they good at? What do they enjoy doing? What are they naturally talented at? And how can we incorporate more of that into their business so they can continue to grow and scale and move forward?
And with that, how do you kind of identify those things in terms of like what people are good at and then what they enjoy doing, and then the things that need to be done, right? Because if you have a small team or it's just one of you, there's things that have to be done that you might not be able to hire for yet because you don't have the resources. How do you approach that problem?
So a lot of it is really diluting all of the gurus and experts' opinions out there, because I think there's just so much like shiny object syndrome and like fear of missing out, and like, oh, this person did this and built their business, and then this person did this and built their business, and then all of a sudden you're like, I have to do 50 things in order to build my business. But those things might not be things that you enjoy. They might not be things you're good at. They might not be things that actually will build your business. So what I do is a way to kind of like shrink time, because obviously getting to know somebody and what they're good at and what they are naturally talented at can take a really long time. So I shrink time by looking at personality assessments. So we look at everything from, we can look at 2 personality assessments, or we can look at like 20, but it could be everything from Enneagram, Colby A, astrology, human design, strength finders, Myers-Briggs, et cetera, et cetera. There's just so many that are out there, and basically look at those results, see what they're naturally talented at doing and what comes naturally to them. And let's put more of that in there. So kind of that positive psychology idea of let's play to your strengths. Let's not worry about the things that are hard for you. Let's really play to your strengths. And then let's see how we can build a business that feels good and allows you to grow the way you want it to.
Got it. That makes sense. And then what does that look like for your clients? Like, how are people sort of reacting to being stuck, and what are the signals that you're seeing for most of your clients when you start working with them?
Usually it's, so one phrase I use a lot is like, what got you here won't get you there. So when you're sitting there going, I built my business, I grew it, like it was so much fun, it was exciting. Yes, it was work and it was probably long hours and a lot of energy, But now everything I'm doing, I'm just still staying in the same place. Like nothing that worked before is working now. So you almost like hit that wall of, this genius that I had, this brilliance, this thing that made it seem so easy before now is not doing anything. So I'm just literally like in the same place, almost like running on a treadmill type of feeling. And so what I typically do is two things. I kind of sneak in a little bit of corporate language because a lot of people, like I said, are either burned out or they pivoted. So corporate language can be like triggering where they don't want to like think about it at all. But when you have a business that you've grown to probably high 5 figures, or I'd say actually probably mid 6 figures, and you want to go to that 7-figure range, you have to really start looking at your business from a corporate perspective a little bit. So I try and get rid of all the evil parts about corporate, all the trauma parts about corporate, and just keep the good stuff, which is essentially your mission, your vision, and your values. So a lot of times business owners, they're excited about something, they're passionate about something, and they just like start a business. And they don't actually look at why they started a business, what the business does, or how they want to do it, which would be their values. And that's when they end up getting stuck and unhappy and overwhelmed and anxious and all those things.
Yeah, that's great, and that's I think super relevant for actually where we're at as a company, where we've kind of gotten over the 7-figure hump, and I've found that it's harder to figure out where my time is best spent, as a CEO, because before I was in a sales seat, it was very tangible, right? You get on this many calls, you close this many deals. Since getting out of that seat, it's harder to figure out what inputs are going to create what outputs for my time personally, not for the teams. Yeah, I'm trying to bring that to a question, I guess.
I think what you're talking about is like actually stepping into that CEO role, that leadership role. And that's where the mindset piece kind of comes in. So there are like hard skills, there are Facebook ads, there are certain marketing techniques, there are certain sales techniques that people can absolutely work on to improve, their closing ratio and those things. But I think there's like a mindset piece there about stepping into that CEO role, that leadership role. And that's where we help them a lot too, because they go from doing all the things, wearing all the hats, being that entrepreneur, where it's just sheer like energy and coffee that is driving you, through your day, to like, okay, you're the leader of your company. Like, how can you work, kind of that cliche, work on your business versus in your business? Like, what are your revenue generating activities that are unique to you and your genius as the owner that can actually move it forward? And then either ignore the rest, or like you said, if you can, outsource the rest. Because if you're making more money in your company, what could that money go towards to help you outsource potentially?
Right. And that I think that's all generally agreeable. And I think we've all heard a lot about, working on, not in your business. And it's I found it to be tough to identify all the ways in which you could be working on it versus in it. It's situational and it's hard to know. That said, are there any frameworks for the negatives? Sometimes it's easier to go negative. Like, are there things that you see your clients doing that are definitely working in when they should be working on? Are there any examples you can think of?
I think a lot of it, again, might go back to the mindset piece. I think people look at that last. They think, oh, if I just take this course or download this freebie or listen to this guru or apply this algorithm, like, ta-da, magic, my business is successful. But a lot of times it really has to do with kind of unlearning a lot of things that they think are true, which might be from their corporate days, like things like redefining what success means. I think it's this idea, especially in the United States, that it's like, I have to make $10,000 per month or have a 7-figure company or have employed this many people to be successful. But I tell my clients a lot of times, like, if that's what you want, fantastic. Here's what needs to happen. You're going to need to build a team. You're going to need to become a manager, a CEO, a leader. However, if your personal finances exist, that this amount of money works for you and the overhead is a lot less, that could also be perfectly valuable, valid, and another definition of success. So it's almost like just not blindly following the path of like, here's what success is to everybody but me, and actually having that desire and that passion to reach that goal, whatever it may be.
Yeah, I think that's important, because you have these metrics, like whether it's top line revenue or headcount or anything, that are super legible because they're generally more public. So then they sort of like inform behavior more than they should, because people aren't going to go talking about their net profit. They're not going to be talking about the cash of the bank or whatever it is, their happiness, their relationships. It's not legible. So I think that's really important. And to go back to something you said earlier about the benefit of the sort of corporate approach to this, can you dig into that a little bit more? Like, what is the baby in the bathwater with the corporate stuff?
Absolutely. So one of my biggest things is really about reverse engineering. So when people get into their company and again, they grow it and they have various products and they're experimenting and they're having fun and they're throwing spaghetti at the wall. And then they're like, okay, I'm working so much, I'm working so many hours and I'm not seeing any progress. Like now I need to really look back and see how can I move forward. So I love to really look at their goals for the year. I think with small businesses, you really can't look much past a year. I mean, you can kind of dream like 3 years from now, I'll have the private jet and the yacht or whatever you want to visualize, but really it's a year. So this year, what is your goal? Great. Now, what do we need to do every quarter to reach that goal? Now, every month, now, every week, now, every day. And I really try and break it down to no more than 3 tasks every day that they can do to move their business forward and hit the goals that they're trying to hit. And then the second part of that would be to look at the metrics. So obviously you can set goals and you can say, I think this is the best way for me to hit them, but that's not always the case because obviously life and business and commerce, things change all the time, algorithms change all the time. So looking at those 3 tasks that you do every day and then weekly, monthly, quarterly, also looking at the metrics and saying, okay, great, I'm on track. Like I'm on track to reach my goals, or you know what, I'm not quite on track. What can I pivot quickly in order to reach my goals? And then at the end of the year, 90% of the time, they've kind of easily and effortlessly hit their big year-long goals that before was actually keeping them really like stuck and overwhelmed and like procrastinating because they were like, how do I get from here all the way over there?
Yeah, I think that's really huge. And I think what's tough is that, and I'll hopefully bring this back around, but I think the best definition of entrepreneurship I've heard, and I forgot who said it, he's a Harvard business school guy, and I'm sure that there's a bunch of people jumping in their seats like, oh, it's this. I hate it when I listen to a podcast and you know the answer, but you can't think of it. The person talking doesn't know it. But anyway, the definition is entrepreneurship is the pursuit of opportunity using resources that are not completely under your control, right? So there's this murkiness, and you were kind of mentioning the idea of what got you here, what won't get you there. So you're talking about those specific tasks that you need to do on a weekly or monthly basis or whatever. But I think what we find with our clients, even clients that are like well above 7-8 figures, is they know that, but they don't know what those tasks are, right? And for us, we're in the prospecting space. So we know if we get this many prospects in our business, we're going to close this many deals and these things will happen. I think for our clients, though, they don't quite know that yet. We can just say, hey, we can get you this many prospects, but it's going to be a process of learning what those numbers are and what your input metrics are going to be to produce an output. So we don't have to go get into the weeds on the sales front. It can be in any walk of business or life. But how do you deal with that problem of that murkiness when you're doing something that, where the inputs are disconnected from the outputs, I should say?
Sure. That's a really great question. I mean, part of me says my biggest advice to people is to, when you get to that point, if you have the ability to do so, financially and brain space wise and time wise, is to hire experts. You're an expert, I'm an expert. We have an outside perspective of their business that they don't have. And so them being able to identify those tasks that would actually move their business forward, I think is really hard for them because they have the blinders on, like they're in it every day. They can't see the opportunities. They can't see the leaks. They can't see the bottlenecks. And so even to bring somebody in for like a strategy session, even if it's just an hour to kind of look at what they do. So one of the things I do with people, if they're not quite ready to work with me on the long-term basis, is like a customer journey audit. And so I'll look at their customer journey, like how do people find you? What are you selling? How do you follow up with them? How do you sell to them? How do you get testimonials afterwards? And usually within that, I can find at least 3 things that are really easy for them to fix, like just right off the bat, that will help make a huge difference. And I've seen it time and time again, where just having that outside perspective it's like worth its weight in gold, because you really just can't see what you can't see.
Yeah, that makes sense. And there's a couple of things there. So I guess on the customer journey side, I'm sure that it's very situational for the things that are broken, but are there any broad categories of problem that you see where it's just if you could, I always ask this, and I think it's Tim Ferriss probably invented it, but if you could put it on a billboard, what would it say as it applies to the customer journey? Yeah,
absolutely. Number one, the thing that I see, I don't want to say everyone, but most people have a problem with, is follow up. It's like they spend so much energy getting the lead, talking to the lead, selling, marketing, posting on stories, like doing all these things that they're doing. And then someone might inquire or say that, oh, I'm kind of interested in this. Can I learn more? They might send them a proposal. They might get on a call with them. They might write them back. And then like nothing. Nothing. There's no additional follow-up. There's no follow-up 3 months later, 6 months later, 18 months later. And I'm probably going to drive your audience crazy as well, because there was a study that came out that said, I think it's like 80% of consumers purchase when they inquire within 18 months. So it's like, if you can follow up for 18 months, you will probably close 80% of the inquiries that you have. So it's like a long game. And most of us, if we have automations, like we're online businesses, our follow-up sequences might be like a month or 3 months or something like that. And then we're just like, okay, well, they didn't buy, whatever. I'm going to go out and get more leads and more prospects. But it's like, if you go back to that person that 6 months ago inquired, and let's say they've taken no action, and you reach back out to them, hey, how's it going with that thing you inquired about? Did you have some good headway, make some good progress? And they're like, no, I'm still stuck. I'm still not where I want to be. You probably will make a sale. But I see it with myself, because I'm one of those, I love to inquire. I love to look at new things and like explore and have calls with people. And I'm like, I'm ready to buy. And it's so amazing to me how many people don't pick up on the cue that someone's ready to buy.
Yeah. Yeah. What do you think that cue looks like? Like, what are people not listening hard enough for in your experience?
I think people are afraid to ask for the sale. I think it's just they feel salesy. They feel like it's sleazy. They feel like it's a used car salesman. So again, that goes into like some mindset work of like, you have a solution to someone's problem. You're selling them is like a kind act of them now not having this problem anymore. Like, you're solving their problem. So like this kind of idea that like sales is sleazy and sales is creepy and sales all this is manipulative. So I think that's another mindset shift that people need to make, especially business owners, because that is your number one job as a business owner, especially in those beginning phases. You are the salesperson, and you have to sell, or you don't have a business, you have a charity.
Yeah. And I think just what we tend to see is just lack of training at all, because granted, in the defense of that, I think a lot of the times the training that gets pushed on people is not very good for a B2B consultative sales situation.
Yes.
And that's 80% of the stuff that goes out there is hard sell or whatever. It's consumer, it's transactional. But in response to that, people do nothing, and they don't get any help. But
Right.
I do think that, and what we've worked on a lot internally, is basically getting as many cycles going as possible so that you get people to a decision, a yes or no. And even if it's a no for now, then at least you've gotten them there.
Yes.
So that there's less kind of follow-up. But I guess, you talked a little bit about those signals and kind of asking for the sale and that sort of thing. In terms of the follow-up process, I think that one thing that's tough is just like where to use automation. And when it's like top of the funnel, there's room for more automation because there's more people that fit a particular cohort. But then once you've had a conversation with somebody, you've gotten to know them, over automating can actually hurt you. And it's more about process and that kind of thing, at least from in my experience. Can you talk about that a little bit? Like, what are those follow-up processes that are working for your clients in those situations?
Absolutely. So I think depending on the size of the business and how many clients they have, and obviously their bandwidth and everything else, but when you're at that point of business where you're like, I want to grow, then you probably have the time and space and energy to do things a little automated, but also very manual at the same time. And when you run out of that time, then your business has grown so much, then yay, good for you. That's wonderful. Like you succeeded. So I do something, I love technology. I love tech. I love apps and everything else, but I try and be as simple as possible. So literally, like I use something like Asana or Trello or ClickUp or another project management type tool. And when I have a conversation with somebody, I put all the information in there, and then I set myself a reminder every week, every 2 weeks, every month, just depending on what the conversation is, to follow up with them. And then I put a link to how we connected. So let's say we connected on Instagram, direct messages. So I'll put a link to their Instagram so that when it says Tuesday, follow up with Dan, I can just go in there, click on that, takes me to Instagram. I can say, hey, Dan, how's it going? How was your week? I heard you just got back from your honeymoon. Did you have a good time? And just kind of keeping that connection, because sometimes just staying top of mind for people, they could turn into clients, but they also could be like, oh, I was just talking to my client who actually needs your services, and you just popped into my inbox, and I remembered that you exist and you do this. And so I feel like it's just that kind of like omnipresence of like, hi, I'm here, like break through the noise. Remember we talked and we had a great time, and now maybe we can work together at some point in the future. So I like to do it as simply as possible, not make it super complicated. It doesn't have to be a big like hullabaloo. It literally can just be like, hey, it's Tuesday and I was thinking about you. How are you doing?
Yeah, that makes sense. And sometimes, as long as it's tasteful, any sort of activity is better than nothing, as long as
Yes.
it's like you're targeted and you're thoughtful about it. So
Mhm.
I think that's really good. To shift gears a little bit. So you mentioned that you're working with lots of like corporate expats and pandemic pivoters. How would you describe this phenomenon? Do you think it's something that's grown a lot since the pandemic? And if so, like what are the sorts of businesses that people are starting these days?
Absolutely. So I think before the pandemic, the gig economy, the freelancer economy, I think since 2008 with the crash and everything else has just been growing steadily. The pandemic, I think, really changed a lot of industries that people were like, oh, you can't do that from home. You can't do that remotely. And all of a sudden, oh, wait a minute. Yes, we can. We have the technology, we have the ability, we have the bandwidth as far as, Wi-Fi and everything else goes to do that. So what I find most people do is if they're corporate expats or pandemic pivoters, they have a passion. They have usually a creative passion. So they're like, you know what? I really want to help people like me. I really want to help people that are in my industry. I really want to help people that may be burned out and be able to start over again and have a new career. So I've seen everything from lawyers to stay-at-home moms to doctors to financial consultants who are like, here's my expertise. And they have an amazing expertise. Like they are experts in what they did, and they did it for a decade or more. How can I take this expertise, this knowledge, this like lifetime of skills, and apply it to something that could be brick and mortar, but a lot of times is more of an online business, and enjoy it, have a quality of life, have a wonderful work-life balance, and like this great lifestyle? And like, how can I really make the money to support my family, doing what I love and incorporating the experience that I have?
Yeah, and for people at the really early days of that, I think what might make people's ears perk up in our audience is the access to that kind of talent, right?
Mhm.
Especially with the talent squeeze, and then there's certain areas where it's really hard to find the right expertise. So I guess like how when you're talking and coaching your clients or consulting your clients, I know you're not doing coaching. What's the level of openness to that? Like, is it sort of like, are they testing things out and it's like, maybe I'll take on, this client for 6 months to figure out if I can validate this and
Mhm.
kind of work as in a fractional way as if I'm an employee, but it's a freelance model. Like how are people kind of thinking about these businesses? And I'm sure it varies a lot.
It does vary. And I think that's what's wonderful and can be kind of overwhelming at the same time, is there's so many different ways to get into that. I mean, you could do something like Upwork or Fiverr, for example. Let's say you're like a graphic designer and you love designing greeting cards for people and you want to start a greeting card business. You could get on Canva, go on Upwork, go on Fiverr, have a profile and try your hand at that and see what happens. And maybe it's a side hustle at first, and then it kind of moves into something more full-time down the road. There's also the way that I started, which is I actually applied for a job that people were looking for. So, virtual assistant, executive assistant, tech virtual assistant, online business manager, project manager. There are so many of those opportunities. So, people that were in corporate that manage projects, manage teams, manage departments. You could go on Facebook right now, join a few Facebook groups, and you'll see like probably a dozen opportunities every week. That could be anything from project-based, part-time, fractional, all the way to full-time, possibly employee status. And then if you, let's say you do that and that's kind of safe, you dip your toe in the water, you learn some things, and then you want to start your own business and actually either offer those services or maybe do a course or like a membership or teach other people how to do what you've done, then that's usually kind of more of the advanced level, in my opinion. It's like get clients, make money, feel confident, understand how the industry works, whatever your industry may be. And then if you're like, hey, I want to teach other people or I want to show other people how to do this skill, then that's usually kind of like the more advanced level.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I guess like roughly speaking, and I'm sure it's hard to identify perfectly, but like roughly what percentage of your clients decide to keep continuing versus being like, this entrepreneurship thing isn't for me. I'm going to either work freelance or go back to being an employee or whatever it is.
Oh gosh, I think unless there's like a financial pull, like if they're just not, it's not working for whatever reason, whether it's just their time and energy, or it wasn't what they thought it was going to be, or there's not a market for it, or they just don't like the online world, or they don't like the brick and mortar world. I would say, 80% of people stick with it. They might pivot their ideal client, they might pivot their offerings, but they stick with it. There's about 20% that might go back into the workforce, but usually there's kind of like an outside reason for that. Like maybe they have an illness in their family or a spouse lost their job, and so they need to bring it back up to the par as far as their income goes.
Yeah, that makes sense. And safer to kind of create a stair-stepping situation as opposed to the leap. And I think that that's like one of the most wrong and common cliches about entrepreneurship is that entrepreneurs are big risk takers, and it's actually the opposite. Peter Drucker wrote a lot about this when he was alive, that entrepreneurs are great risk managers, right? And that's like the first thing is managing that risk. So
yeah, it's that calculated risk for sure.
Yeah. That makes sense. And kind of getting towards the end of our time and just kind of a couple more questions. There's this YouTuber and writer that I like a lot, and you might know him, is Alex Hormozy. And if you check out his videos, it's funny because like you'd think that it was the sort of like Ferrari get rich quick sort of stuff because he's really good at the YouTube marketing. But if you watch his stuff, I think it's really on point, and he's thinking very deeply about this stuff. But anyway, regardless of your opinion of him, he has a good metaphor that's kind of a riff on the shiny object syndrome thing. And he refers to the lady in red in the Matrix, where Neo's getting taken through this simulation, right? And he's focused and he's walking with Morpheus, and then he loses his attention, looks back at the lady dressed in red, and then there's Agent Smith with the gun in his face. And Hormozy's point was that lady in red keeps reappearing, at whatever stage of the business, whether you're at 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 figures. She keeps coming back in different forms and taking you, distracting you and everything like that. And I've sort of noticed that even people that I know that are very successful, there's always like this new idea that I'll hear about it from clients too, where they'd be like, we have this thing, it's, we're at 8 figures with this, but we want to do this other thing over here. And we're going to put everything into that basket, even though it's completely untested, and try to make that work. And I'm always sort of like, well, maybe you know something I don't, maybe you're right. But there's always something in the back of my head when it's somebody else, even if it's somebody I don't know well, then I'm like, something feels off here, about you pursuing this thing. But I get it because I see it in myself too. And it's sort of, so, to bring this to a question, like how do you or your best clients, how are they staying focused, continuing to improve the core offer and make sure there aren't any holes in the bucket without getting bored? Like, how do you feel that need of amusement and of not getting bored while continuing to improve the business?
Yeah, there's this moment that happens with business a lot of times where I think people get to that boredom, or it's stressful and they have some anxiety about it, and they start to think about how they might have, felt in corporate or burned out before. And they're just like, I want to explode the business. I just want to burn it down to the ground and start all over again. And so usually there's a little bit of like triage that goes into that, and like asking a lot of questions of like, okay, like you said, are you bored? Could you put out a new offer? Could you learn a new platform? Could you start doing more networking and outreach? Like where is this energy coming from that you want to just destroy it all and start all over again? And so kind of trying to redirect that energy. Like, that's great, you have this energy, that's great you've accomplished this and you've like conquered it, and now you want to move on to something else. So what could that be? Could that be a new offer? Could that be a new technology platform that saves you time and makes you more money? Could that be dedicating some time and money to a charitable opportunity? So now you're giving back and being impactful in your community. So like that energy, I think, is fantastic, but like, can we direct it towards good instead of evil? Because it's all energy. And if you put it in something that's just spinning your wheels and costing you money and costing you time, and like you said, it might just bomb because it's not a well-tested idea. And now you're dividing your time between two places and almost like creating competition for, your resources and your knowledge and your intellect. So I really try and like redirect that energy as to what could we use this energy for good, as opposed to like starting all over again with a brand new business. And I'm a big fan, like I'm a multi-passionate person too. I change my mind all the time. I get bored super easily. Having fun is like one of my top values. So like I experience this all the time, which is why it's great to have clients that experience it. 'Cause I'm like, oh, I go through this every month. Let's talk about how we can actually redirect this energy into something that's positive.
Yeah, and I like that. I think you hit on a couple of things. I think for one, you mentioned the charity aspect. Like, it doesn't have to be a thing in the business. Like, could be something just in your life to divert that energy. Also, like there's so many of these personality assessments and that sort of thing. And I think it's like maybe this is something you're working on, but I think there's a place for somebody to sort of like, maybe it's just a epic content post or something that basically just like summarizes all these personality assessments and says like what each one does and what it's good for. And I think the reason I thought of that was the values assessment thing is really, really useful. Mm-hmm. But I think the cool thing about the values assessment is it's not permanent. Like a Colby thing is a little bit more permanent. It's sort of like how you like to work. your working habits, but your values can like change all the time. They can change every few years, maybe, right? So I think that that's a really, insightful thing to do every so often. It's something I probably need to do.
Yeah,
Just
that
thinking
goes
of
back
it.
to the mission, vision, values that I brought up earlier. So like
Right.
your mission is like your what, your vision's your why, and then your values are kind of like your, secret sauce. Like how do you put your values on this? And that was such a huge thing that helped me recover from my burnout and actually figure out that I wanted to start this business, was looking at my values. And like I said, one of my top values is to have fun. And I had to struggle with that for a while because that is not like a positive value in the society. Like I was like guilty
Yeah.
about having the value of fun. It's like, so everything I do has to be fun? No, of course not everything has to be fun. But when I decide to do something, if it's not fun, then what I do is I figure out a way to make it fun. Like it doesn't have to be done just the way people have always done it or the way you think it has to be done. You can figure out how to do these boring things in a fun way. And or if you can't and you have the budget for it, you can outsource it.
Yeah, I think that's really important, and that's super interesting. And with that, is there a way that you recenter yourself to the fun? Because you mentioned like there's things you have to do that aren't fun, but you find a way to make them fun. Is
Mhm.
that like a meditative internal process, or is there something you're doing to kind of get yourself back in touch with that?
Yeah, I think awareness is a huge part of it. And that's just been over me working with consultants and coaches and working on myself and self-discovery over the past, few years as well. Is like the reason I burned out is because I was not living in a way that was conducive to me or like that worked for me. And so now to avoid burnout and be proactive about it and to continue the recovery, I'm always looking at like, does this work for me? I don't care if it works for you. I don't care if it works for 500 other people. Does this work for me? And I think that's a really hard thing for us to say because we need to follow the crowd. We need to do what everybody else is doing. We need to, go with the status quo. So definitely is a moment where if I'm frustrated and I'm feeling like that frustration and that impatience and that anxiety, I'm like, okay, hold up. Like, what's going on right now? Okay, this isn't fun. How can I make this fun? And either figure out a way to make it fun or I just don't do it, or I might outsource it if I'm able to.
That makes a lot of sense, and it sounds like a useful reframe and everything.
Yes.
So, Hunter, this has been so great. I feel like we could go a lot longer, on a lot more topics. But with that, I know you have a generous offer for the audience if you want to talk about that and just kind of where people can reach you and everything like that.
Absolutely. So I have a lovely free customer journey audit that we talked about before on our website for podcast listeners. So it's tortoiseandthebear.com/podcast. And you can sign up for that. And basically, like I said, I look at your customer journey, I look at your personality assessments, and then I send you back a personalized audit with at least 3 actionable suggestions that you can take with and run. And if anybody has any questions, I love answering questions. And Instagram at Tortoise and the Bear is probably the best place to find me for that.
Awesome. And we'll get all that linked up. Hunter, this is great. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me.